my granddaughter.
For Canadian politicians of the last century, it must be confessed that the native population represented an inconvenient complication to their main interest. That is, constructing the railroads that were transforming the nation and distributing the resulting contracts in useful pockets. Railroads are a wonderful symbol of the modern world colliding with all that had proceeded.
And I say we'll use standard gauge, standard steel rails and iron bridges on the intercolonial.
Nonsense.
We're not just building a railroad, gentlemen. We are building a country.
Patriotic rubbish.
Well, we can just stop that. I had a bush. Come on, Roberts. And Roberts, look at this, huh? Between Halifax and Toronto, there are 5 different time zones. It's ridiculous. Oh, with the railway and the electric telegraph, what the world really needs is a system of standard time zones.
But sir, cities set their own time by the sun. They'd never agree.
Well, we'll have to make them, Roberts. Make them understand. Even if it takes years.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Sanford Fleming of Canada, to whom the world owes the invention of standard time. Mr. Fleming.
He surveyed and engineered 4 Canadian railways and transformed the world with standard time. Sanford Fleming, engineer.
In 1885, Fleming was, of course, present at the famous photograph of the last spike. In 1873, he had crossed the country to survey the land recently acquired from the Hudson's Bay Company, which was to become the Canadian Northwest. The secretary of the survey party was his friend and minister, George Munro Grant. Grant's travel diary of the trip, ocean to ocean, marked the beginning of his emergence as a national prophet.
The relationship between the two continued for a lifetime. Fleming helped Grant to raise money for Queen's University. Grant made Fleming the university's chancellor. By the time of his death, Queen's had been transformed from a struggling Presbyterian theological college into a national university. A big part of Queen's education was its principal's vision of a Christian Canada. It included education for women, defending Oriental immigrants, a morally upright British Empire, and good relations with French Canada. Educators, male and female, poured out of Queen's imbued with a sense of vocation and mission.
Children.
You must understand, young woman, that you work for us and not the other way round.
But you would like to tell me how I must go about teaching the children to read.
I've told you what it is we want you to do, and that's enough.
Please, Mr. Clarence, would you take a look at this?
You'll not bother me with that.
But you see, sir, your son read this today. It is quite a difficult passage. It is from the Bible. This is what I use to teach him to read.
Ah, Mr. Clarence, why don't you just read it then?
Both of you know I cannot read a word.
Throughout most of our history, millions of Canadians have owed their education to young women who taught in one-room schoolhouses, much like this one.
The Reverend Alfred Fitzpatrick, one of Grant's theological students, established Frontier College.
Frank, you make $6 a week. You work 28 weeks. So, you multiply the first number.
Oh, Dr. Spock, can't it wait till we get to the reading exams? I can't do it in my head.
Good, Frank, give it a go.
Yeah, okay. So it's 28 times 6? Okay. Yep.
That's good, Charlie. Now a whole page of big M's and small M's, okay?
Trembled as she touched her lips to his.
Look it up.
Dr. Spock, you know you ain't the first doctor to come in here working. There was a guy named Bethune. Yeah, Norman Bethune.
Oh, yeah, I heard of him. What was he like?
Oh, it was okay. Didn't treat us all like little kids the way you do anyhow.
Starting in 1899, a movement of volunteer teachers brought literacy and numbers to work camps across the country, evolved into Frontier College, and now, a century later, has taught reading and basic skills to millions of Canadians.
Grant became a trusted advisor to Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who, as a boy, had himself spent a couple of years in a Presbyterian school in New Glasgow, Quebec. The Prime Minister fondly recalled the schoolmaster, who imparted a passion for English poetry with a leather strap in one hand and a glass of the finest in the other.
Along with the Governor-General's wife, Lady Aberdeen, Grant supported Laurier's efforts at reconciliation between French and English, Roman Catholic and Protestant. Grant's interests included the social and labor issues that arose in Canada as Canada began to industrialize. When young Mackenzie King from Kitchener inquired about graduate work in political science and economics, he wrote to Grant.
As a student, King had fire in his belly. He wrote exposés on conditions in the garment industry. But successful politicians quickly learned the virtues of caution. It is no secret that King's government was not keen to admit Jewish refugees at a time when it would have saved lives. The prophetic role of agitating for refugees was left to Senator Corrine Wilson and Jewish convert, the Reverend Morris Seidman, who ran the Scott Mission during the Hungry 30s. If some Presbyterians, like King's old friend Tom Eakin, principal at Knox, shared the general prejudice against the Jews in the 1930s, John Buchan, the Governor-General, was an early and influential friend of Israel.
Historically, relations between Presbyterians and Jews were good in Montreal. Clustered closely together were Erskine Presbyterian, the Côte Street Free Church, and Sharif Israel. Personal relationships between D.H. McVicar, founder of Presbyterian College, and minister of the Côte Street Church, Principal William Dawson of McGill, and Abraham de Sola, rabbi for 50 years of the synagogue, reflected this geographical proximity. De Sola's day job was Hebrew professor at McGill, so at least for educational purposes, Jews counted as Protestants in Quebec.
Presbyterians, along with the Holy Spirit, can claim some credit for establishing universities in the Young Dominion. Dawson and Grant can fairly be claimed as the founders of McGill and Queen's respectively. Both were products of Thomas McCullough's Pictou Academy. The emphasis on education was typical of the Reformed tradition generally, but nowhere was it in more evidence than in Presbyterian Pictou. McCullough was the first principal of Dalhousie.
The Reverend Robert Falconer, who grew up as a son of missionaries in Trinidad, was president of the University of Toronto from 1907 to 1933. Reverends George Bryce and John Mark King played key roles in establishing the University of Manitoba. Because King's German was excellent, his students included Ukrainian immigrant John Bodrug, the main force in establishing the Ukrainian Presbyterian Church. The Women's Missionary Society helped by establishing a network of hospitals and residential schools, like Dr. Hunter's School at Toulon, Manitoba.
They'll find them.
Give this little one a bed.
There are no more beds. We'll find you someplace.
And Laura wouldn't have died if this community could agree on a real hospital. If we can forget our differences.
Я можу дозволити $50.
Ми білдували найліпшу стайну.
То ми збудуємо шпиталь? Ну, так. Добре.
The main instigators of enthusiasm for mission were women. The WMS, 16,000 strong under the formidable Catherine Ewart, raised much of the money required to send doctors, nurses, teachers, and evangelists to various parts of the globe. George Leslie Mackay left for Formosa in 1871. He quickly learned the language, adopted Chinese clothes and customs, took a local bride, and besides preaching, extracted a lot of teeth.
Canada contributed her